Welcome, everybody, to episode 13 of Black and Gold Weekly, a weekly Bruins show in partnership with Black and Gold Productions. We have plenty to talk about with the trade deadline coming up, the Bruins presumably getting back into playing in the next few days, and of course, a little bit about why the Bruins haven't been playing for the last few days in the COVID situation going on there. So despite a light week in the games department, there's still plenty to talk about as far as the Boston Bruins are concerned. And before we begin, I do want to thank Mark Allred and everyone at the Black and Gold Productions team for all of the support. This show would not be happening without them, and obviously is a part of that network. So a huge shout out to all of them. And as you can see, I have a very special guest here today. It is Ryan Sweezey, co-host of the Bruins Breakdown podcast, which is also part of the Black and Gold Productions podcast network. A couple weeks ago, I had Leon on, who is the other host of that show. Now we're having Ryan on this week. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, John. It was nice having you on our podcast, however many weeks ago that was, and I know Leon was on here, and with quarantine still going on, I talked to like 4 people, so it's nice to talk hockey with someone that's not Leon.
Yes, and we're certainly ready to go here and plenty to talk about. Before we begin, I do want to mention the links down in the description of this video, though. There are 3 links, one for Bruins apparel, one for NHL apparel, and one for NCAA college apparel. If you are in the market for any of those things, it would really help out a lot if you click those links and check out the selection there. There are tons of different things, from shirts, sweatshirts, jerseys, sweatpants, accessories, all sorts of different things that you can check out. Bruins, NHL, and NCAA, it's all there. So check out those links, and it would really be helpful. But let's get in. Starting here, the Bruins have not played. Their last couple of games have been postponed. They were supposed to play the Islanders Tuesday night. They were supposed to play the Sabres on Saturday. Neither of those games happened. And the reason for that is the Bruins COVID list now has 5 guys on it: Sean Kuraly, David Krejci, Craig Smith, Jake DeBrusk, and David Pastrnak are all on the list for the Bruins. So while the list around the league certainly hasn't been the same as it was, say a month to 6 weeks ago, COVID is still affecting the NHL, and the Bruins are feeling the brunt of it here. So hopefully they'll be able to get back playing on Thursday night against the Islanders. But, they haven't played the last couple of games, and there are some big names on that list, some important players on that list. Sean Kuraly has already been ruled out for Thursday's game, so I would assume that that's a positive test. The other guys have not, so we don't know the specifics of the situation there. But Ryan, this having these guys on the list, this cannot be good for the Bruins, especially guys like Krejci, Pastrnak, even Smith and DeBrusk, who play pretty big roles on this team. This is not great for Boston, especially when they're fighting for, playoff positioning with the Penguins and Flyers right now.
Yeah, no, it's obviously less than ideal. It's something that honestly was probably bound to happen sooner or later with how much it was affecting the league earlier in the season. And like you said, it's become less of an issue. But I think so much of that has just been so many guys that already had it, they're not going to really get it again.
Yep.
So the Bruins were fortunate to make it this far without really getting touched by it. Now it just seems to be their turn.
Yep.
Thankfully, we haven't heard anything so far, knock on wood, yet about any more cases spreading around. So hopefully they're able to nip it in the bud. But yeah, it's not great timing with the Bruins kind of clawing to keep their hold in the top 4 spots there. As I was saying on our podcast this week, just kind of a lot of unfortunate stuff too, of like Jake DeBrusk just scored a goal, which he needs to do, and he's got 2 goals in 4 games, and now he's got COVID, and the Bruins had won 2 straight games, which they were having trouble stringing them together. So it's kind of a momentum killer. You lose you're delaying that first game at the Garden with fans that was supposed to happen. That would have probably been a bit of a boost.
Yep.
You're looking forward to getting in there at home against the Islanders, who you've had trouble with. So yeah, it's just not great. And then you do worry about the effects that it's going to have the rest of the way, especially in a shortened schedule. Just the physical effects on some of these guys if they do end up having it. A lot of them end up kind of relatively unscathed, but for as many cases of that there's also cases like Rasmus Ristolainen that you hear about
Yep.
where he was really, really struggling and had trouble getting back on the ice.
Yeah, and Boston's going to have a lot of games in a very short period of time when they come back. I think it was 28 games in 45 days for the Bruins when they return. That's a lot of hockey in a very short amount of time. And if you have players like Krejci and Pastrnak and DeBrusk who, if they happen to feel effects from this and they wear down, those that could really affect the second half of your season. And that would not be good for the Bruins, who are going to need their best players to be their best players coming in the second half here as they're, right in the thick of a playoff race.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to think about is the Bruins also for the first kind of half of the season, their schedule wasn't nearly as
Mm-hmm.
condensed as some other teams. They had more kind of like 3 or 4 days off than a lot of the other teams did. So you saw them kind of struggle with that a little bit once the schedule started to ramp up. Of they didn't have their feet on the second night of a back to back, which is a very normal thing, but
Mm-hmm.
they didn't really get a chance to get used to that. I think some of the other teams, as they got more used to that schedule, they might suffer a little bit at first, but then they eventually get used to it. Bruins haven't really had that. As soon as the schedule started to pick up, is when this pause happened. And you heard Brickley and Jack Edwards talking about it a little bit of like, oh, they're struggling with the condensed schedule, and again, it's something everyone's got to deal with this season, but they haven't had to deal with it yet. So they're
Mm-hmm.
really still just kind of getting their feet wet. And like I said, it's just not an ideal time for this pause to have happened because not only does it prevent them from getting into that rhythm they need to get into, but it also makes what's left even more condensed than it already was going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if Boston's struggling already, they've got a big wake up call coming because they're going to be
Yeah.
playing a much more condensed second half than they did in the first. Compared to other teams, Boston actually had a fairly light schedule, and they pretty much had games in hand on a lot of the teams around them, around in the division and around the league for the most part. And now they're going to have to make up those games in hand coming up in the second half here. So they're going to be playing a lot of hockey in a short period of time, and it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that and how they hold up health wise for in the second half of the season, because injuries have already played a major role in the Bruins season this year. They've had a lot of guys out recently, particularly on the back end, and there's been guys throughout that lineup that have missed significant amount of games, important games. And um, we look at their injury situation now. The injury list is still very, very long. There's a lot of defensemen on it, and one of the almost silver linings somewhat of the Bruins not having to play the last few days is that it's given that some time for a few of these guys to get closer to a return. And that's, I guess, one good thing you could say that comes out of this is it looks like Tuukka Rask is about ready to come back and could play on Thursday. Brandon Carlo is back skating. Jeremy Lauzon is back skating. Kevin Miller is not ready to come back yet, but is back skating at least. Jared Tenorti could play on Thursday. And even Zach Senyshyn is back on the ice and trying to get some work in. So this long list of Bruins players that have been out. It appears that a number of them are, at least close to a return, if not ready to return yet. And that would be big for Boston as they head into the second half of the season if they get some of these guys back in the lineup.
Yeah, it would definitely be a boost, and you hate to have the excuse of injuries playing a factor into how the team's been playing, but
Mm-hmm.
with the just almost comical amount of injuries that they've had, you just shake your head every time something else happens. It would be just inaccurate to say that it hasn't played a factor.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the opening night lineup and the 6D that were in there, five of them have been injured, and really only Zaboral missed like a couple of games, but the rest of them, three of them are still out and have been for a while. And it affects even the defense affects the offense because they've had to change up the way they've played, and while they've still played decently well defensively, it's hurt the way they've been able to push the pace of play on the offensive side of the game.
Yeah.
You also look at a team like the Islanders, who's been kind of on a surge, and until I think it was a week or two ago, Noah Dobson went on the COVID list. They had only played 6 defensemen all year. The Bruins have already played 12 or 13.
Yeah.
So that's gonna take its toll on you. And up front too, you got some new guys in this year there that you hope we're gonna be able to address the secondary scoring issues. And nobody outside of the top line has really played consistent minutes together, so there's no chemistry, and you can see that on a lot of nights of the Bruins just don't seem like they have anything going. They seem discombobulated, and they're not really used to playing with each other. So I think Sweeney takes a lot of criticism this year, and I don't think it's necessarily merited because I don't think their issues right now have that much to do with roster construction. It's more just kind of luck of the draw and having to deal with what you've been dealt with. And there's certainly flaws with this team, but I don't think we've gotten necessarily a fair chance to truly evaluate what this team is when it's at its full strength.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that because this team hasn't really been at full strength at any point since this very beginning of the season. And since then, there's always seems to be at least a couple guys out. And now we're at a point where there are a lot of guys out. And, there's a lot's been made about the secondary scoring issues. And, Charlie Coyle's kind of been pointed out this year as a guy who's not having a good season. But how many different wingers has Charlie Coyle played with this season? It seems like a different set of guys on his wings almost every game. And even himself has been moved up to the second line to play wing some nights, then back to the third line to play center some other nights. Like, he's been all over the place. There's been no consistency in that lineup. And I think a lot of the secondary scorers have kind of felt that because it's been a new lineup almost every night, and they don't have time to get settled in with their normal line mates before it just changes again.
Right. That's something that Leon and I were talking about this week too. We are trying to figure out, and we think that even Krejci has played with at least 8 different wings this year. So you get further down the lineup, it's even less consistent. And someone like Coyle, who he's definitely having a rough season. He hasn't really looked like himself, but he's also he's in addition to the line juggling and line mate juggling, he's also taken on a different role than he's had in the past too. He hasn't historically been on the penalty kill, and he's been a pretty significant part of the league's top penalty kill this year too. So you kind of do wonder a little bit if he's potentially hurt at all, but two, if those added responsibilities are kind of taken away from other parts of his game.
Yeah. Definitely a good point there, and a great thing to think about because, that mentally wears on a player when they're asked to do something that they don't usually do. They have to start putting some more focus on that, learn that side of the game, learn how to do that new role that they've been added into. And then that takes some of your energy and focus away from other parts of your game. And it just changes the way that you overall play. And that's definitely a transition when a player gets added into the penalty kill or something like that they're not used to doing. And that could certainly be affecting his play this season.
Yeah, and Coyle's a guy that he's never been like a monster point producer. He's one of those classic guys that no matter what the stats say, you look at him and you're like, look at that guy go. Like, that guy's just a horse out there. And just, you haven't seen it out of him this year. Maybe 1 or 2 games, or just like a shift or two in some other games. But most of the time, he's hardly noticeable. And he's one of those guys that when he's on, he's noticeable every time, even if he's not scoring.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've never been. I don't look at analytics a whole lot, and I'm not on real numbers. I like to watch and just see like who's impacting the game. And Coyle was a guy that last season I thought was very impactful, and you noticed out on the ice a lot, and you were like, that guy, even no matter what the numbers say, and sometimes the numbers back it up, sometimes they don't. But when you watch a guy, sometimes you just get that feeling like he's out there, he's noticeable, he's doing things to help drive the play. And he's really making an impact on the game. And this year, Coyle has been invisible for a lot of this season when I'm sitting there watching the games, and it's like, where's the Charlie Coyle from, last year, and even when he came over the year before, he stepped right into the Bruins lineup and looked good, and he hasn't looked that way this season.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the boat of, to some degree, I still don't entirely understand a lot of the advanced stats.
Yeah.
Like I still don't have that reference point to always know like what's good or not. Like I can look
Hmm.
at a player and be like, he's got 30 goals and know that that's good, but I can't necessarily look
Yeah.
at those things.
Yep.
I'm also of the mind more of that you should look at the game and then have those numbers to kind of highlight things you're saying,
Yeah.
not necessarily the other way around, because
Yes.
there are some things in there, like I don't remember that this might not have be the actual stat, but I remember it was like Corsi 4 percentage or something like that for forwards last year. And of the Bruins forwards that played at least like 10 games, the best one on the team was David Backes. It's like that just kind of illustrates
Yeah.
to you that, these maybe aren't telling you the whole story.
Yeah, I think they're good to kind of look at as almost like evidence pieces to like back up what you're seeing, but you don't want to, just necessarily base it strictly on the numbers without actually knowing what's going on in the game and watching the games. Because there was one this year, I think Jeff Skinner has really good defensive analytics this year for Buffalo. Like his defensive analytics are off the charts. It's Jeff Skinner. He has like one goal this season. He's getting paid $9 million. It's like he's been awful this year, but his defensive analytics are good. So
Yeah.
it's like it can be deceiving.
He's also playing with the fourth line pretty
Yep.
much, which is probably the other guys are playing a little bit more of a defensive game, and some of the matchups they're doing is that's just kind of the role they're being put in. So
Yeah.
I take a lot of those with several grains of salt.
Yes, that they can be deceiving for sure. But Coyle, from the eye test, just something's been off this year, and you hope that maybe as the team gets healthier, and ramps up for the second half of the season, that maybe he can get his game going together. Because honestly, if he has a great postseason, I don't care about the regular season. If he comes in and has a great postseason and has a really impactful third line role in the playoffs, where maybe add some really good secondary scoring, scores a couple game winning goals, and the Bruins can go on a run, I'm going to completely forgive him for having a lousy regular season if he gets it done in the playoffs. So it's not like we're out of hope here for Charlie Coyle.
Yeah, and that's how he was when he first came in. Granted, it was a short sample size in the season because it was a deadline deal, but there are guys that get you there, and then there are guys that like get you through once you're there.
Yep.
And you think of guys around the league like a Sam Bennett, where we hold his trade value maybe higher than it should be because he's been a good playoff performer,
Yep.
but he's been a bust in almost every regular season other than his first one.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great point. Bennett's a great example of that. The guy just brings it in the playoffs, but in the regular season, he's nowhere to be found 90% of the time. And it's interesting how some players are like that. And but Bennett's a great example of one of them.
And
But
Krejci's in that kind of vein
yeah,
too. If he's definitely no slouch usually in the regular season, but he's that guy that when like the last bunch of years, if you've considered trading him, the reasons you're hesitant to do so is because of how well he historically does in the postseason.
absolutely. He's been a big playoff performer, and it shows that the years that the Bruins have done really well in the playoffs, David Krejci has played really well in the playoffs. In the years where Krejci's either injured or doesn't have as good of a postseason, the Bruins tend to be out earlier in the playoffs. So he's definitely one of those guys that steps it up in the postseason for sure. Um, but injury status right now for the Bruins, a bunch of guys, getting closer to coming back. And I think we're going to hopefully see this team start to play a little bit better as they get more guys returning to the lineup, particularly on the back end. I mean, this defense has been absolutely decimated with injuries this season. And now with Carlo hopefully soon to return, Lausanne coming back, Tenorti with a chance to come back here shortly. If they could get some, especially Lausanne and Carlo, back into that default, I think that is going to be a big boost for Boston. Not that they've been bad defensively, even with the injuries. Their goals against numbers are still phenomenal, but they need some guys that I think can contribute a little bit more offensively and take some pressure off of McAvoy and Grzelcyk, who are kind of shouldering the load right now. And I think Carlo and Lausanne are two guys that are really important to this team to have in there in that lineup.
Yeah, and like even Miller too. We
Yep.
forget about Miller because we're so used to not having Miller over the last few years. But he was
Yeah.
he was such a bright spot and unexpectedly so. Going into the season, the biggest question most of us had was how is this defense going to hold up? And honestly, the 6D that cracked the opening night lineup have been great. We haven't seen them in the
Yep.
lineup. None of them came out of the lineup for anything less than an injury. So if
Mhm.
you get even one of those guys, if not two, would help. And as I said before, that's as much as the scoring has really been the issue lately. Um, they've had to adjust the way that they've played defensively on the breakout and rushing the puck up ice to manage to still be defensively successful uh, with the pieces that are on the roster on
Yeah.
any given night. They've had to adjust on the fly to fit the personnel that they've had. So if they're able to get some of the normal, regular, planned on personnel back, then they'll be able to kind of go back to the style of play that was more successful for them earlier in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that. And, it's going to be big for this team to perform when they do get these guys back. So we're at the halfway point of the season now. Bruins are in fourth spot, although they do have games in hand on pretty much everybody around them. So they will have the opportunity to move up potentially, depending on if they can win those games in hand. But they're in the heat of a playoff battle that now almost has 6 teams in it going for 4 spots, because the New York Rangers have very quietly kind of crawled their way back into things here after after a very slow, disappointing start to the season. New York's been a lot better recently, and they're kind of pushing as well. The Flyers have gone the other way. The Flyers started out well and have completely fallen off a cliff here the past 3 weeks. Pittsburgh's held solid in true Pittsburgh fashion, as they usually do. Bruins are right there, and then the Islanders and Capitals have kind of pushed themselves to the top of the division. So this is a big second half coming up for the Bruins, and um, you know I think they're going to be a playoff team. I mean, do you have them making the postseason this year? I certainly think that they should.
I do.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I'm less confident in my preseason prediction was that they would win the division.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's still within reach again,
Yep.
mostly because of the games in hand. But the other reason is also the reason that I think they're going to make the playoffs, which is they still play Buffalo 7 times.
Yep.
So the key here, I think, is going to be taking care of business against the weaker opponents.
Yep.
Because honestly, they've played outside of the Islanders, like the Capitals and the Penguins, they've played pretty well against the Flyers. They've beat up on.
Yep.
But the teams, like one of the teams they've struggled the most against has been New Jersey.
Yeah.
So they still play them a bunch of times too. New Jersey's kind of fallen off a bit from where they were earlier in the season. So hopefully start to see more success against them. Granted, you still want to have success against the good teams. Like you don't want to
Yep.
beat up on the bad teams and then get to the playoffs and realize that you're outmatched by the other teams. But in terms of making sure that you stay in this race, you gotta take those points when you can get them. You also need to take care of business in the first 60 minutes of the game a little more consistently than they had earlier in the season. They gave up a lot of loser points to teams that are in this race against them. So against someone like Buffalo or New Jersey, it's not going to matter as much. But if you're going up against Philly or Pittsburgh or any of these teams that are right around you in the standings, you cannot afford to give them any extra points.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. It's going to be a fun race. Again, I completely agree. I think the Bruins should definitely make the postseason. It would be a big disappointment if they didn't, but it's certainly not going to be easy, and they're going to need a healthy, full lineup as much as they can get to pick up those wins, make sure they win the games that they should win, and then hopefully be able to take some games against some of the other tough opponents as well. Because the Islanders, the Bruins have not beat yet this season. They need to pick up some wins against New York. They need to continue to show that they can beat the Capitals. Pittsburgh, close to them, just a few points separating them in the standings. That's going to be a big matchup. And even the Flyers, Boston's dominated Philly every game this season. They need to continue to do that. because Philadelphia, as bad as they've been playing recently, are still just a couple points back. Now, the games in hand do very much favor Boston in that regard, but you can't take anything lightly, I think, particularly in this division, is the point that I'm mostly trying to make here, is that this is not going to be an easy end to the season, and that they're going to have to come out and make sure that they get the job done to make sure that they do make the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's a great point against a team like Philly. If you can't take them lightly, even though you've had success of, some of the games they've played them. Carter Hart has been atrocious this season, but we know how talented he is. If he plays like himself, even for 2 games, you're going to be hard pressed to win those 2 games.
Yep.
The other thing too is I think it was the last time they played them was in Tahoe.
Yep.
They were missing 8 of their regular players.
Yep.
Like Bruins have had some issues, but they haven't been missing that many important guys at once. Like Giroux was out. I can't remember.
Konechny was out.
Voracek might have been out.
Was out. Yep.
And
there were some others too. Lawton was out.
Lawton, I think. Lindblom. Like basically almost every significant player except for Couturier or Van Riemsdyk was out. Mm-hmm. And they had two D that were dressed as forwards that game. Plus like some guys from the taxi squad. So you haven't played the Flyers in a while, and even when you did, it wasn't like the Flyers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So see how Boston does here in the second half, but I want to take a look now that we are at the halfway mark. I want to kind of take a look here at the first half of the season and just give some grades on the Bruins game in different areas to this point in the year at the halfway mark. So we'll just go through I want to start with the offense. Just offensively in general, if you had to give the Bruins a letter grade for their offense this season, what would it be?
Probably give them a C. It has not been good. I think there's been flashes where it's okay, but like even when like the top line is producing, I haven't felt like the level of offensive danger from them that I have in the past.
Yep.
And they're the only thing you can rely on right now. You are getting flashes. I still feel like the secondary scoring has been such an issue for so long. We're just used to it.
Yeah.
Despite the numbers not being great, I feel like it's better than it has been. It's still not good, and I chalk most of the issues up to just the carousel of players there. But like, I mean, outside of like Jake DeBrusk, I don't think anybody's been like, Coyle, but I feel like some of the lower half of the lineup guys have been playing well. It's just maybe not going in the net all the time.
Yep.
They're really struggling to finish. And that's been the biggest issue. They've had all kinds of chances. Even like a guy like Studnicka, who's had about 8 empty nets that he's missed.
Yep.
And just posts and they can't. They're getting about 95% there with a lot of their offensive plays, but they need to find more of a rhythm to getting to 100% more of the time. So yeah, there's all kinds of room for improvement. I don't think it's been a complete failure. But they got a ways to go, and that's for me. That's the thing that they need the most. They need to figure out before they get to the playoffs.
Yeah. I give them a C- on the offensive side of things this year. It's the one area that's really stood out as been a struggle. It's not been good. I don't think it's been a complete failure. I mean, it could be worse, and I know Bruins fans don't want to think about that, but it could be worse. I mean, at least we still have the top line, because Marchand, Bergeron, and Pastrnak have all put up great numbers this season, and they've been really, good as best as they can with shouldering a lot of that offensive weight on just those 3 guys. But there's been a lot of secondary scorers that I've been pretty disappointed in this season. Jake DeBrusk is the biggest one. Coyle hasn't had a good year, and Craig Smith, I expected more from. I was huge on the Smith signing coming into the year. I've been a big fan of his entire career. I loved watching him in Nashville. I just thought for a middle of the lineup guy, he was such a consistent, solid secondary scorer that was going to give you 20 goals year in and year out. And he gets a ton of shots on goal, which is great, but he hasn't been finishing nearly as well this year as he normally does. And that's been an issue throughout the Bruins lineup, is finishing, as you stated. But Smith, I was expecting more from in the goals department. I think, he scored in the last Buffalo game, and that was, I think, his second goal in the last like 16 or 17 games or something like that. And I thought we'd get more finishing offense out of him and some more goals on the board out of him. DeBrusk has been, I think he's been awful this season, and I was a huge Jake DeBrusk supporter for a long time, and I'm at the point where I've given up on him at this point. I'm about ready to move him out of here, but this was the year I thought that the secondary scoring was going to be better, and it's been maybe a little bit better, but I'm still disappointed in it from where my expectations were heading into this year. And I think it's the only part of the Bruins game that I look at and go, I'm really disappointed in it, because in a lot of these other areas, I think they've played well this season.
Yeah, I would agree. I've moved from cold to lukewarm on the "Are we done with DeBrusk yet?" Of I don't want to get rid of him, but I wouldn't be nearly as crushed as I would have been like in the off season. But I think he's going to figure it out. I think
I hope so.
As he's looked more like Jake DeBrusk recently. Like before, he was just kind of going through the motions, and like you could tell how it was affecting him. And he looked like a guy. Like he was just a guy out there. Yeah. Lately, he looks more like Jake DeBrusk in the way he moves, the way he's handling the puck. And I think some of that confidence is hopefully starting to get back. The other thing with him is like the thing we know the most about Jake DeBrusk is that he is streaky as hell.
Oh, yeah.
So the good news is he scored 2 goals in his last 4 games, so maybe that's the start of it. But the thing that's unfortunate is both of those 2 games where he scored a goal, he missed the next game because of COVID.
Yeah.
So you hope that isn't going to derail what would have been the start of a hot streak. But like moments were there. Like there was a game after he missed a game due to injury earlier in the year where he had like 6 or 7 shots. He was just all over the ice, and then he couldn't put one in, so he wasn't able to keep it going. Yep. There was one where he hit the crossbar, and it like went straight down and kind of like turned end over end. Yep. And like it was probably across the line, but you couldn't prove it.
Yeah.
And like I feel like if that had counted, there's a good chance we would have been seeing a Jake DeBrusk after that, because that seemed like the kind of monkey off the back moment. Mm-hmm. But instead it gets taken back, and it's just like, oh, we're right back to this again. And I think that probably buried him even further. So I also like, if you are going to get rid of him, I feel like this is just such a sell low moment that it might not be the best. But if you can get a more consistent scorer in there, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Because even when he's putting up, like he put up 27 goals 2 years ago, it's still like it's in bunches. Like he's going to be invisible for stretches. So if you can get a guy that's going to score that much, but spread it out a little better, then it might be better off in the end.
Yeah. I mean, I was hoping for such a big year from him this year, because like you said, 2 years ago was like the Jake DeBrusk breakout. He had 27 goals, and it looked like this kid he's arrived, he's ready to go, and he's going to be a significant goal scorer in the NHL. And then last year was a bit of a step back, and I thought that this year was going to be the year that he was going to, get back to being that guy pushing towards a 30-goal pace and pushing to show that he's a legitimate top 6 winger and a guy who's going to score on a regular basis. And it's almost been another step back year for DeBrusk, which has me starting to lose my patience a little bit, but I certainly hope that he does get it figured out and get it back on track. If he can have a big second half of the season, I think a lot of us will forget about the first half. If he comes out and rips off, 12 to 15 goals in the final 28 games, I think we'd all be pretty happy with something like that.
Yeah, I hope so. We'll see. There's certainly a level of pessimism in this fan base that might never forgive him, but we are very much a "what have you done for me lately" type of fan base. So hopefully he gets it right in the end here.
Yep. Okay, so we're gonna move on now to defense for our letter grade for just the Bruins defense overall so far this season at the halfway point.
So I'm gonna give them a. This is a very tough thing to grade for me,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna give them just on overall body of work. I'm gonna give them a B.
Okay.
Um, I feel like it could be higher, especially when you consider how they've done defensively with the pieces that have had to play most of the time.
Yep.
Because so many of those guys have gone above and beyond what their individual expectations were, and the fact that
Hmm.
the team is still keeping the puck out of the net at such a good rate is nothing short of a miracle
Yep.
based on who's been in. Like Jared Tenorti's playing top 4 minutes before he got hurt.
Yeah.
That's not good, but they turned it into a good. But I am considering that a grade in the overall effect on the game
Hmm.
of the defenseman,
Yep.
not just the team defense.
Okay.
Like if you're picking up what I'm putting
Yeah,
down there.
exactly.
So
Yep.
like not just preventing goals, but like how the impact that the defensemen in the lineup are having on the play.
Yep.
So I would have argued maybe earlier in the season when you had all the regulars in the lineup, probably an A to an A minus.
Yep.
But at this point, it's probably a B. There's definitely some room for improvement, but I also again I think that that's just some of these guys come back from injury. The needle's gonna move back kind of toward the A.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say B plus. I think it could very easily be in the A's. But the injuries have certainly played a role, and I think it certainly hasn't been perfect. But given the injury situation, given the guys that have been playing big minutes, probably a lot more minutes than they should have been for the Bruins this year, the fact that Boston has still been so good defensively and keeping the puck out of the net, and playing as well as they have, I think that's a big plus for the Bruins D. And I would again, they're not getting much offensively from the defensemen. That's been an issue with the exception of McAvoy. No one else is really giving much offensive push and impact on the game from the back end. But when you have this many guys who probably wouldn't normally be in the lineup playing big minutes, that's bound to happen because they're focusing on defensive side of things and making sure that they don't make the mistake that gives up bad goals rather than trying to push offense. So I think it's not perfect. It could be a little bit better, but given the circumstances of this year, I think overall it's been good, and I would give them a B plus on that. So, let's see, goaltending next up. Tuukka, Yarrow, and even Dan Vladar gets in for a game and actually plays extremely well in that game against Pittsburgh.
Oh, he's great.
Bruins goaltending this year. Letter grade for that.
I gotta go with a B minus. I feel like they've been fine. They haven't been like lights out, but they've been good. Particularly like I think Halak continues to, for the most part, play well.
Mm-hmm.
If you kind of take the two games against the Islanders and the Rangers, one for each of the two goalies,
Yep.
out of just that single game for each of them out of the equation, and look at the overall body of work, I think they've both been pretty good. Halak has been very good, other than that Pittsburgh game where he gave up the two softies in the first period.
Yep.
But overall, I think he's been good. Rask has not been Rask of last year,
Mm-hmm.
but I think he's been as good as he's needed to be for
Yeah.
the most part. His numbers haven't been fantastic, but he's rising to the occasion when he needs to, and you've kind of noticed that in some of the games, like some of those comebacks against Washington, where
Yep.
maybe he didn't play great, but once the team started to get back into the game, he locked the door when he had to.
Yep.
He's been really good in overtimes.
Yep.
So I think that's promising. Of like he hasn't, even when his numbers haven't been great, I don't think he's looked bad. Like he's shown that he's capable of rising to the occasion when the occasion calls for it. You'd rather him just be on all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's kind of like the goalie that gets nominated for a Vezina because he plays in a good team and has a million wins.
Mm-hmm.
Like his numbers, his goals against average and save percentage might not be that great, but it's about making the saves when you need to make the saves to get the W, and the W is really the only thing that matters at the end of the day.
Yep. Yeah. For the goalies, I'm gonna go with a straight B on this one. I think they've been good. They've been above average. They haven't been elite though. You're not talking about Rask and Halak as, best tandem in the league this season, the way that we were last year. Their numbers aren't as good as they were last season, but they've still been good. Obviously they've won a good number of games. There's been a few stinkers in there. Obviously those back-to-back New York games when they got blown out 2 nights in a row, that stands out as some of, the worst games that the Bruins have had this season. But when you look at the overall numbers, the Bruins are not giving up a lot of goals compared to the rest of the league. They're one of the best defensive teams in the league. They're keeping the puck out of the net. And I think the goaltending it's been good. They've done their job. They've made the saves that they needed to make for the most part. And with the exception of a couple of games that you probably would have liked, the goalies would have liked to have back, for the most part this year, it's been solid. So it's definitely, I think, above league average, but it's certainly not elite, high end, top goaltending that I would give them an A for. So I'm going to go B on that one. All right. Power play now. This is interesting because I feel like if you split the first half of the season in half, there'd be two very different answers. But overall, first half grade for the power play this year.
I'm gonna give them a B.
Yep.
Um, B to a B plus, probably more of a B, just kind of with the recency bias.
Yep.
They started off great and then they just have tailed off.
Yep.
I also think, for the most part, when they get in the zone and they're set up, they're still very deadly.
Yeah.
I think their biggest issue has just been their
Yeah.
zone entries have been horrible. So many of the, like, they had one really rough stretch where they went a long time without a power play goal, and they couldn't get the puck in the zone. They'd kill off the whole thing themselves, or as soon as they'd get it in, they'd make an ill-advised pass and it's going right back out of the zone.
Yep.
So the other thing to consider too is, one of the big strengths of the power play earlier in the year was Nick Ritchie down low. There was a set play that they would do over and over, and now teams know that that's happening. So
Yep.
they've had to kind of switch it up. He got taken off the power play at times. He's still kind of getting bumped up and down between 1 and 2.
Yep.
One thing that was interesting in the recent batch of games was they moved Bergeron out of the bumper and down into the net front, which I don't think I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
So they're trying different things. It hasn't been bad, other than that little lull in the middle of the first half of the season there. But they're still like top third of the league, I think, just barely. But it's certainly they dropped about 10 places in the span of a couple weeks, so that's never good. So I think if they can maintain where they're at right now, overall they're fine. But you would like to see it get a little bit into that elite echelon that they had been in for so long.
Yeah, I'm going with a straight B for the power play as well. Again, they were really, really good to start the season. It's definitely tailed off here recently. The big thing you talk about, the zone entries, I think that's been, definitely their biggest issue of recent has been too many turnovers at the offensive blue line and in the neutral zone is really hindering their ability to get that puck in with possession. And I've noticed guys like Marchand just trying to do too much. Pastrnak at times just trying to do too much. And they end up turning the puck over, and then it's going back out of the zone the other way, and you've got another 15, 20 seconds killed off of the penalty. And that's something that's kind of been an issue for them over the last few weeks watching this team. But they're still able to score on the power play. Most of their offense, which isn't a whole lot of offense going on right now, but most of their offense still comes on the power play. And overall, in the first half, I think the power play has been good. I'd like to see it get back to being like top 10 in the league or top 5 in the league where it was to start the year. But I think I'm going with a solid B on that one as well. Penalty kill.
I think just one last point.
Yeah.
For so long that, like, we've known that even strength scoring has been an issue, so you kind of live and die by the power play, and the power play has been such top tier that you've been able to get away with it.
Yeah.
So the power play is good right now. It's fine right now, but if it's going to be the thing you're relying on to win you games, it needs to be top 3 to 5 in the league.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And it hasn't been, at least for the last few weeks, but we'll see if they can get back there. Penalty kill. Now, this in my opinion has been a huge bright spot, and with the changes in the offseason, I wasn't sure if it was going to be, because Chara was an anchor to the Bruins penalty kill for so long, but they have not missed a beat without him. What's your grade on the Bruins PK this year?
Oh, I'm gonna give him an A plus on this one.
Me as well. I'll just say that this has been one of the best things I've seen.
It's been great, and it's funny too. I was talking about this with Leon on our podcast this week.
Yep.
Um, I don't think we talked about it at all until this week, despite it's first in the league. But
Yep.
you get so caught up on the things that aren't going well
Yeah.
that like we just ignored it. And I was watching one of the games, and I'm like, have we even talked about this yet? But
Yeah.
I really don't think we have. But no, it's been great. It's like 89 point something percent, which is almost unheard of.
Wow. Yep.
And it's honestly a shock because, like you said, Chara's gone. And like I've always had some questions of how much of it was him. He obviously played so much and did well, but like I've never been the biggest Chara person.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it would be fine. I didn't think it would be this good. And even recently, like you're missing most of your top penalty killing D.
Yep.
Carlo, Lozon, Miller, like
yep.
You've got different guys in there, and they continue to do well. And even up front, like DeBrusque and Coyle have been on the penalty kill this year, which isn't something you're used to seeing. They've been great. They've had some offensive chances. Marchand and Bergeron continue to be more of a threat to score than the other team when they're on the ice, and Corrali and whoever else are usually out there with him have been pretty good too.
Yeah.
I've questioned how good Corrali's been overall, but the penalty kill he's still been pretty effective.
Yes. Yeah, I'm A+ for the PK. I mean, how can you complain about the number one PK in the league? And the numbers too, it's almost 90%, which is an absolutely unreal number at the NHL level. So no complaints at all about the penalty kill. They've been phenomenal this year, and there doesn't seem to matter who they put out there. Everyone just steps up and gets the job done. And that's been a very big bright spot for the Bruins this season. Finally now, coaching, Bruce and the gang. Overall grade for the coaching and what the coaches have done with this team so far this season.
I feel like this is a very difficult one for me to evaluate because you could go in so many different directions with it. But I'm gonna give them probably like a B+ / A-.
Okay.
I think that they have done very well in tailoring a game plan around the guys that have been in the lineup. First off, I think that with a fully healthy lineup, they've done well, or as close to full as it has been. But in terms of getting different guys looks, they've done pretty well. I also think the way that Cassidy wanted to play informed a lot of the off-season decisions that were made. And the way that he wanted to play was effective. Again, for personnel willing, but like the way the defense is pushing the play, they've had different ways of kind of pinching the D down to create offensive pressure and having a center circle high to guard against that. They had a lot more for a while, like both D kind of going behind the net and pressuring the forechecker. And a lot of that I think has worked out really well. The only thing that still drives me nuts is how much line juggling happens.
Yeah.
And to some degree, injuries have necessitated that. But sometimes it's just Bruce doing whatever he wants to do. And the biggest issue with that is sometimes they'll change something up in practice, like put Pasternak on the second line, and then they'll do it for a period. And if it hasn't worked, then they go right back to what they were doing.
Yeah.
I'm very much think that if you're going to try things like that, changing up the power play, changing the lines, you need to give them a little bit longer to see if it actually works before you scrap the idea entirely and go back to what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. They make these changes, and then all of a sudden, they give up on it after a few bad shifts or a bad period. And it's like, well, why'd you even make it in the first place? if you're just going to give up on it that quickly. It's not just going to instantly click. It's not how chemistry works, especially with line changes and stuff like that. I'm gonna say B for the coaching, because there've been some things that I've kind of shaken my head at a little bit. But overall, I think they've done a good job. I mean, obviously, with all the injuries that Boston's had this year, the fact that they have 16 wins already, and are in a playoff spot is a good job, because they had excuses. If they were to just fall off a cliff and drop out, they've had the excuses of saying, like, we're missing 5 of our 6 starting defensemen at one point, and we have these all these guys out of the lineup. That hasn't happened. They're still winning games. They're still a good team. They've got twice as many wins as they have regulation losses. So I think it's been good overall, but some of the line juggling moves, I've kind of been wondering why about. And another thing, the inability to make adjustments to beat teams that they are struggling with is something that's kind of frustrated me. Like, watching them play the Islanders over and over and get beaten the same way by the Islanders over and over, and not really change anything to try and obviously the Islanders system, or whatever they're doing, is working, and Boston's not really changing things up a whole lot to try and break that system that New York is playing. And I would just, it's almost like in football when you make those halftime adjustments to, when the defense is shutting down your offense, you change things at halftime and then come out and try new stuff in the second half. And particularly against the Islanders, and even somewhat against the Devils, I'm like, these teams are beating you for the same reason multiple times this season, and you're not really making any adjustments to that. So that kind of, I think, comes back on the coaching staff, maybe being a little stubborn and not really changing things that might need to be changed.
Yeah, I think to some degree you want to play your game. That's how you win games, if you're able to dictate how you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not able to do that right off the hop, then yeah, you got to make some adjustments. And they haven't been able to do that, and then they haven't made the adjustments.
Yeah, the Islanders in particular, because it's like the same thing every game. And I'm watching these games and I'm like, the Isles know how to shut you down through the neutral zone. They know how to not give you good puck possession in the offensive end. That, the Islanders don't give up high quality chances very often. And they're very good at counterattacking. That's what they do. They play strong defense and then they counterattack. And Boston's made no adjustments to that style of play at all this season. And they keep losing to the Islanders, and it's just I watch it and I'm just like, face in my hand, or can you please try something different to get by this team, please?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But overall, I think the coaching's been good. It hasn't been, I don't think, Bruce isn't winning the Jack Adams again this year, but it's been good. And I would say B for that, in my opinion. But we're the halfway point. There are grades for offense, defense, goaltending, power play, penalty kill, and coaching to this point in the season. We'll see how they do in the second half. Hopefully, things keep going well and the Bruins hold on and make the playoffs and have hopefully even better second half of the season than what we've seen here in the first. But want to move on now to some trade deadline talk, because the trade deadline coming up April 12th. Obviously, always a huge day in the NHL, and particularly with the playoff race and everything going on, Boston is a team that has been rumored to be in on plenty of players and looking to make a move, as are many teams around the league. What I want to do here is just kind of go through a few players that Boston has been at least mentioned in the mix for. Whether, depend how much they're going after each particular player kind of varies, obviously, but they've at least been mentioned in the mix for these guys. And just kind of go through and kind of rate your interest on, do you think Boston should go, really go for it for them? Kind of just consider it depending on the price, maybe a backup plan, or if you are just no thanks, not in on this person at all, and just think you go in a different direction. So we're going to start with some Nashville Predators here. because Nashville is rumored to be one of the big teams that will be selling at the deadline, or at least could be, because their season's been a disaster. That's a whole other story. All that money tied up on, guys like Yossi Duchesne, Johansson, Forsberg, others, and they're not even really close to a playoff spot. Matthias Ekholm, top 4 defenseman, probably the biggest defense name getting talked about on the market right now. Tons of teams seem to be having interest in Matthias Ekholm. I think it's going to be a big-time bidding war for this guy. I don't think the Bruins actually end up getting him, because I think a team like Philadelphia or even maybe Winnipeg would completely overpay for a guy like Matthias Ekholm, because they desperately need to add to their D-cores. But what's your interest level on Ekholm becoming a Boston Bruin?
I'm somewhere in between consider it and go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to have him.
Yeah.
The thing with me is I think that's the move that puts you over the top.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, I don't know if they're there.
Yep.
Like, as I've kind of been arguing with Leon a bit, of he's more of the mind of the biggest need is to go get that top 4D.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the scoring forward is the much bigger issue. I think if you certainly want to have a guy like Ekholm come playoff time, but if you can't put the puck in the net, I think that's you need to fix that before you go elsewhere. So I think ideally it's probably get a scoring forward and maybe a depth D, or a guy that can play in the second or third pair, but isn't maybe of the caliber of Ekholm.
Yep.
The other thing too is which I think is going to play a factor in a lot of this, is I don't think the Bruins have the pieces to pay the best price for these deals. So I don't think the other team is necessarily going to be willing to take the Bruins package when they're going to be offered better things. The last little wrinkle too is you pay more for Ekholm because he's got a year left on his deal. He's not a rental, but there's the expansion draft. So it ends up, you end up paying non-rental prices for a guy that either is going to be a rental or causes you to lose somebody else after that. So if you get Ekholm, you're like, the only definite probably is that McAvoy is one of the 3 that you're going to protect. So then at that point, you're going to lose probably either Ekholm, Grzelcyk, or Carlo. The other option is you could protect the 4 of them, but then you can only protect 4 forwards. And 3 of them are Bergeron, Marchand, and Coyle. And then the 4th one is Pastrnak. So those are the only guys that you could do. And I suppose, like, if it comes down to, like, would you rather have Ekholm or lose DeBrusk? You might lose DeBrusk at this point, but that's assuming that's who they end up taking. So I think that moral of the story, I think the price is going to be too high for them to pay, and there's a lot of additional complicating factors there.
Yeah, definitely. And those factors are going to factor into every potential trade at the deadline this year. And all of these teams have to be thinking about the expansion draft. They have to be thinking about, is the player a rental, or do they have term on their contract, and what are they willing to pay for the extra term if they do have it? And I think it's going to be an interesting trade deadline for sure. And that brings me, you talked about scoring, to the next Predator I want to talk about, Philip Forsberg. This is a guy with term, again, still on his contract, and another Nashville guy that is rumored to be out there if a team's willing to pay. And I think the asking price would probably be too high for what the Bruins can afford. But if the opportunity was there, where would you stand on Philip Forsberg?
The qualifier there is if the opportunity was there. I would say go for it, because the thing that they've always been missing is a guy is going to score. And he is a guy is going to score. Like, they've gotten some guys for scoring, but they're guys that aren't a sure thing. Forsberg would probably be the closest thing to a sure thing that they've acquired in a very, very long time. I think it's a bit of a pipe dream. I don't think one that they're going to trade Forsberg. They could, but if they're going to hold on to anybody up front, it's probably him. And the other thing is, if the asking price for Ekholm is going to be high, the asking price for Forsberg, I think, is going to be even higher. The Bruins will not be able to pay that unless they're moving, like, a far too significant piece.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think it's very realistic, but if I wouldn't be surprised if somebody else though with a little bit bigger of a prospect pool were to go out and make a push for Forsberg at the deadline this year. I would not be surprised, and I think Nashville would probably take it. Given their cap situation, and when Forsberg's contract's up in a couple of years, they're still going to have Johansson and Duchesne at $8 million per year. They're still going to have
Right.
Yossi on the books. So I think he's a guy that Nashville would be able to move, but I think it's going to have to be another team with a bigger prospect pool who can pay more than what the Bruins can for a guy like Philip Forsberg, who is certainly a top line scorer. So a little bit definitely a step down, but maybe a more low-cost forward option, a guy that could play center or wing. I'm not too huge on him, but his name's come up. Mikael Granlund, another Nashville Predator. He'd be more of like a third-line addition as opposed to that big go-get-it type move. But how do you feel about Granlund coming to Boston if it was more of a low-cost option?
I'd consider it. I'm probably more of a no thanks.
I'm a no thanks
But
on him
I'd
too.
but I'd consider it. I mean, he's a guy that's got some pedigree. He's been a top 6 player in the past, but he hasn't come close to that for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
He's only got 6 goals this year, so if you're trying to solve your scoring issues with that, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen unless he suddenly regains his form playing with some different guys.
Yeah.
The other thing too is there's some interest from Toronto, there's some interest from other places that again I think is, despite him being a lesser option, I think is probably going to drive the price of it up a little bit. And if the price for him starts to get driven up at all, I don't think it's worth it at this point. He is a very versatile player, and that is the type of thing that the Bruins like. So it wouldn't shock me that much. You could plug him in almost any spot, and he's gonna be serviceable. But if your goal is to get someone that's gonna you're confident is going to put the puck in the net, I don't think he's your guy.
Yeah, I'm a no thanks on Granlund. I don't think he's what the Bruins need. I think Mikael Granlund plays a lot better at center than he does on the wing, and the Bruins don't need a center. They're pretty well set with their guys down the middle. I think they need to be looking more for a winger, and Granlund again isn't a huge goal scorer. He's a guy that more of his points are probably going to come from assists anyway, and I just don't think that fits what Boston needs. And again, I think for a team like Toronto, that would make a lot more sense because they need a third line center, especially if they move Kerfoot out. So that'd be a better move for a team like that. The next guy always comes up, always one of the big guys that's talked about. He does have a no movement clause, but I can't imagine him not wanting to waive it coming from the Buffalo Sabres. His name always seems to be out there at deadline time. Taylor Hall, obviously this would be a huge splash move to go and get a guy like that, but this would be a pure rental most likely because he's a free agent again this offseason. Not having a good season in Buffalo at all. Nobody on the Sabres is. Interest in Taylor Hall at all?
So this one might be a surprising answer, but I would go for it. He's obviously had his struggles recently, but one thing with the no move clause is he signed a 1-year deal with them with a no move clause, probably assuming that he would be traded.
Yeah,
this just gave him control over where he gets to go.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I like this is I think you're buying low. Again, you're going to have some other bidders in there, but he's struggled enough that it might scare some other teams off.
Yeah.
The difference between him and some of the other guys that maybe aren't having a great season is there's so much more upside that I think it's worth the gamble. He's had a rough couple of seasons, but this is a guy that has really never played for a good team.
Yeah.
So if you put him on a good team, he might suddenly look like Taylor Hall again.
Yep.
He's more of a playmaker than a goal scorer,
Yes.
but he can put the puck in the back of the net. And adding a playmaker isn't necessarily the worst thing if it's going to bring out the best in some of the other guys around him. We talk about the drop-off since the MVP season, but it's really only been 2 seasons since then, and the subsequent one he was injured for a lot of it. And the one after, he was a pending UFA, started the year on a bad team, and then got traded to another not so great team in
Yep.
Arizona. So he's, for me, is a candidate that is probably still has a lot of value, even if he hasn't been showing it lately. And if you put him in the right situation, um, I think he still has the chance to flourish. And he is close. He's closer to that, like, not sure thing, but closer to that star caliber of player that you're
Yeah.
missing. So especially when I think it is kind of a buy low and a rental situation, I
Yeah.
think that's probably might be high risk, but the highest reward move that you might be able to make right now, at least up
Yeah.
front.
Yeah, I'm not huge on Taylor Hall, but I would certainly still have to consider it because the talent level is obviously there. And this move for me would depend a lot on asking price. Like if this, I would not want to, overpay for Taylor Hall at all at this point, especially him being a rental. But if Buffalo would accept a reasonable deal and something that wasn't too overpriced, you definitely have to consider it because that's a guy that can come in and significantly impact your offense. And that's obviously a big issue for the Bruins right now is the offense and getting some scoring. And I'd almost like to see Taylor Hall play with Charlie Coyle and see if he could get Coyle going. Because I think Hall would be the kind of guy, because Hall's not really a pure goal scorer. He likes to drive the play. He likes to carry the puck. He is more of a playmaker. And I think getting him on a line with like Coyle and maybe Craig Smith would be a really good line for the Bruins to maybe try and solve some of those secondary scoring issues. And Hall plays a fast game, which doesn't necessarily equate to playing with Krejci all that well because Krejci plays that slow, methodical puck possession style. But if you were to bring in Taylor Hall and play him with Charlie Coyle, you could have a heck of a line there with Smith on the right side. And it's something to worth considering, but if the asking price starts getting up at all from Buffalo, I'd back out at that point. But it's definitely worth considering, I think, if you're the Bruins.
Yeah.
All right. No, interesting guy. This one's just come up recently, but Arizona's been struggling. They're kind of falling out of their playoff chances in the West are disappearing. Scituate, Mass native, hometown kid. I would like to kind of see him come back if possible. Connor Garland, who's had definitely going to be more of the lesser known names, one of the more lower choice or lower cost guys on the trade market that isn't probably going to fetch the same level that a Forsberg or a Hall would, obviously, but Connor Garland can put the puck in the net, and he scores a lot of goals on a team that overall does not score a lot of goals, and that's the Arizona Coyotes. How would you feel if the Bruins were to go after Garland? I believe he has term on his contract too, so this wouldn't
So
just be a.
I think he's an RFA at the
Yeah,
end of the
no,
year.
you're right. He is. He's an RFA.
So he, in a way, has term, and that he's still under team control, but
Yeah,
he
Bruins
still
could
would need a
re-sign
new
him.
contract. So, I think this is my guy. I think this is who I would like to see them go out and get. I had heard some I don't remember which podcast it was, but someone saying that there's a chance you might be able to pay not too high a price for a player like him just to get him out of Arizona, where they are going to have to pay him at the end of the season. He's not too far away from UFA, and they're a team that doesn't want to pay a lot of money to people right now.
Mm-hmm.
I did see, I think it was Elliot Friedman, though, said that Bill Armstrong has pretty much said that he doesn't really want low first-round picks or second-rounders.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it a little harder to go get. But this is a guy that was fairly unheralded when he came into the league, but has done nothing but score goals since he's broke in. He is a local guy that the Bruins tend to like to go after the local guys.
Yep.
So I think that would be a good fit there. Also, if you are going to have to part with somebody like a DeBrusk, this would be a trade I wouldn't mind losing DeBrusk in, because you're getting back a guy with similar offensive goal scoring production over his time in the league, and also about the same age too.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd be a pretty good replacement there. I would prefer to have both of them. But if you do have to move a piece like that, this is probably the guy that I would want to get back in that trade.
Yeah, I'm a full go for it on Connor Garland. I like this kid a lot. I've really noticed him the past 2 years in Arizona. And the fact that he's able to score as much as he does and impact the offense the way that he does on a team that really doesn't have a lot of offense really makes me have high hopes for what he could do on a team that maybe surrounds him with some more offensive talent. And if you were to get him on the wing of a guy like Krejci or a guy like Coyle, he might be able to put up even bigger numbers. And he's scrappy. He goes to the net. He plays the game the right way. I'm a big fan of his, and I think that that's definitely a guy that should be on the radar for Boston, and they should be actively seeking out and trying to add to this team.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. All right. I got a couple of defensemen here, both from the Arizona Coyotes. They're another rumored seller here at the deadline. Veteran guys. Last year their contracts. They would be kind of, if you miss out on Matthias Ekholm, they would be kind of low cost veteran guys that you could come in and maybe be a stabilizer on the back end. But we have Nicholas Hjalmarsson and Alex Goligoski. These are guys that certainly mid-30s now, coming towards the end, but I'm sure would love one last playoff run, one last push for a cup, and guys that I still think do have value and maybe more of a defensive role could bring, some stability to the blue line, especially for a team like the Bruins who are playing so many young D-men who are like 25 or younger. I think it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to bring in somebody like this, but thoughts on a guy like Hjalmarsson or Goligoski or some veteran type D-man like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Hjalmarsson would be a good pickup. I don't see him getting traded, to be honest. Mostly just because I remember there were some rumors involving him over the offseason, and he has a full no move, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm not leaving." So I think there's a good chance that he just stays out his term there. Goligoski, I wouldn't mind as a pickup. That was something that I had kind of discussed in the offseason of a potential deadline target even back then.
Yep.
I think he kind of fits maybe the Bruins' needs and what they're looking for, and I don't think he would cost all that much. The one thing is I haven't really been paying too much attention to the Pacific.
Yep.
And I did notice he scored yesterday and that it was his first goal of the season. Then I looked and he has 3 points this year, including that goal. So he's not having a great year. He did have 30-something points last year, but when he's 35 or something now, that's probably not a good sign that he's dropped off that much.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, short term over on a better team, he could be a decent fit. And if nothing else, if he doesn't cost that much, it's not much of a gamble and decently high reward move if it does work out.
Yeah. I don't think he's not somebody that would cost a whole lot, I don't think, and I think his offensive numbers would be a little bit better if he was on a team that could score more than the Coyotes. And again, that's a kind of a depth move in my opinion, not something that's going to really drastically change the Bruins' chances, but it would be a decent, veteran addition to that lineup potentially, and a smaller move as far as the trade deadline is concerned, but might be worth taking a look at for sure. I would consider if I were the Bruins. Couple more wingers I wanted to talk about, guys that are coming up. Palmieri is always seems to be in the trade talks. I guess we'll talk about him first. Kyle Palmieri from the New Jersey Devils. He'd be a rental. Yeah, he's a pending UFA at the end of this year. Now, there is talks that he could just stay with the Devils and that they might be working on an extension. But if he is available at the deadline, scoring right winger, how would you feel about Palmieri?
I'd feel pretty good about this pickup. He's probably my backup for Garland.
Mm-hmm.
I think he would be a good fit. I also think that to some degree where there's smoke, there's fire. And this is a rumor we've been hearing for like 2 straight trade deadlines.
Yep.
That he was potentially a target. So it could be something that ends up happening. But it does sound like he does have some interest in staying in New Jersey and they'd like to keep him. So I also think despite him being a pending UFA and having some value, I think there's a good chance that he sticks in New Jersey.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. But a guy that if he's out there and if he is willing to New Jersey's willing to move him and he wants to come here, I would definitely consider it. And I mean, I think even you could see a rental deal here where they maybe pay a not too much at the deadline, but he finishes the year with Boston, has a chance at a playoff run, and then just signs right back with New Jersey in the offseason and does something like that where he gets a chance at the playoffs this year and then he goes back to New Jersey where he's comfortable.
Yeah.
Last guy I want to touch on, Rickard Rakell from the Anaheim Ducks. This is another one where there's a lot of talk about him going on right now. Not sure exactly just how available he is. Anaheim's certainly in a rebuild, and there's been a lot of talks that anybody, 27, 28 and older, they're gonna think about possibly moving out because they've got Zegras and Drysdale and this whole Comtois, Terry, this whole new young core coming in. And Raquel's kind of on that cusp of that. Well, they're not going to be good for at least another 2 to 3 years. So is it worth keeping him, or do you move him now while he still has a pretty decent amount of value? This, I think, in my opinion, would kind of be maybe more of a backup plan. But how do you feel about Rickard Rakell?
I'm kind of lukewarm. He's one of those guys that despite having 2 or 3 30-goal seasons, you're still surprised to find that out every time someone says it.
Yeah.
um, which either means he's underrated or he's maybe overachieving a little bit. So he's on a very nice deal for someone that has that resume.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's maybe fallen off a little bit, but
yeah.
The rumors are that the price is extremely high. So again, I think it probably falls into that category that can't be done. I mean, you never know. Sweeney and Bob Murray did make 2 deals last year. Maybe they got something in the water there, but I don't really see that one happening.
Yeah, I'm between no thanks and consider it. It would, again, the rumors are that the price is sky high, and I'm not even touching that if I'm the Bruins. But Raquel is a guy with some scoring ability. The thing that worries me is that over the past 2 to 3 years, he has declined, or his numbers have declined. And I feel like when he first came into the league, there was so much hype around him. And obviously the Ducks were still good then. So he had the benefit of playing on a really good team. And I think maybe he showed that he can be a really high-end player, but he never really got there, or he never stayed there. He got there early in his career but wasn't able to keep that up, and as the team has declined, his numbers and his overall game has gone down a little bit too. And I don't know if he'd just be able to get that back, especially in a short season like this where you're not going to have a lot of time. These guys that get traded at the deadline are not going to have a lot of games with their new teams, and then you're going to be right into the playoffs. So you don't really have that time to get your game back on track if it isn't there already. And that kind of worries me about Raquel a little bit as well, because the last couple of years, he has not been the same level of player that he was earlier in his career when he was really tearing it up.
Yeah. And then the only other things that kind of come to mind is I think that was the last guy you had on your list.
Yeah.
Most of these guys, there's so many teams that sound like they're interested, or the prices are going to be high enough that I wonder if the Bruins do make a move. One, if it's going to be something that we're just not expecting at all, kind of like Nick Ritchie deal last year of wait, what?
Yep.
Where did this come from? The other thing too is I was reading just a list of some guys that could be traded, and I kind of feel like I wouldn't be that surprised if the Bruins look to the Red Wings for some kind of cheap options if they can't get some of the other stuff. They have some guys that could be desirable for not very much. You got some kind of bottom 6 skill guys like Bobby Ryan and Sam Gagner.
Bobby Ryan was the first one that jumped into my head. Yeah.
If you want to keep tinkering with trying to fix the fourth line, there's a guy you could try to go after like a Luke Glendening. And then if you wanted some reliable veteran depth defense, you could probably have Mark Stahl for next to nothing. He hasn't been great the last few years, but it sounds like he's done decently well in Detroit, and they really like him there. So I feel like any of those guys you could get for maybe a late, mid to late round pick, and you wouldn't be given up too much, and it's very low risk move.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of the guys that I put on this list were more the bigger names that's generating a lot of buzz right now, but I would not at all be surprised if Boston goes in more of that maybe second tier down type route where they just go for a lower cost, more of a depth player. And Bobby Ryan, I think, would be a great addition. And he's played well for the Red Wings this year. Obviously a guy that they could easily afford on a very cheap contract, a good veteran presence, and a guy that could add some scoring to your third line easily, without a doubt. And that, I think, would be a much lower cost move. I think if you offer up the Red Wings a third or a fourth round pick for Bobby Ryan, I think they jump all over that. and that could be a solid move for the Bruins if they want to go for a not quite the big splash, but more of a lower cost depth type move. That could be a great option for sure.
Yeah, and then you hope at that point your big deadline pickup is health.
Yeah. Yep. And it could be, I mean, with how many games guys on the Bruins have missed this year and getting the defense particularly back healthy, the you know, getting a full healthy lineup might be the best deadline addition for this Bruins team. We really have not seen how good they can be fully healthy because they haven't been fully healthy. And
Yeah, they lost their second line right wing in the second game of the season.
And he may not play for the Bruins again,
Ever.
potentially.
Yeah.
And he may never play hockey again with his concussion history. So that is another thing, that the best deadline deal for the Bruins could maybe just be getting healthy and putting this team on the ice in the form that it's supposed to be this year. But we'll see what they do at the deadline. It's certainly going to be an interesting trade deadline this year. There's definitely some big names on the market and potential for some big deals to be made. So can't wait to see what happens. But want to look ahead now quickly to the upcoming week for the Bruins. They've got the Islanders on Thursday night, presumably, as long as there's no more COVID issues. That game will happen. It will be the Bruins' first game back in a week since last Thursday when they played Buffalo. So they have the Islanders on Thursday. They have the Sabres on Saturday. Then they have a 2-game set against the New Jersey Devils. I think they play Sunday and Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. So week ahead for the Bruins. How are you feeling about this team coming back from this little mini break that they've had? And, do you how many wins do you think they can pick up in these next 4?
I would feel pretty good even if they just went 2-2 in this stretch.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the most optimistic only because this season they have not played particularly well when coming off an extended layoff.
Yep.
So that's especially tough when the first game back is against the Islanders, who they've struggled with all year.
Yep.
You hope that maybe it's a little bit different at home. But then you got to figure they take at least one of those games against the Sabres. You really hope they take 2, but the Sabres have enough NHL talent that they could string together one good game every once in a while, especially with just kind of a different feel with different coaches in there. New Jersey, they just had, if they can solve the goaltending there, Blackwood or Wedgwood, then I think they're gonna be okay. And the Devils have been on a bit of a slide after a decent start, so hopefully they can finally put the puck in the net and get that monkey off their back.
Yeah, I think Boston needs to win at least 2 of these games. I would be pleasantly shocked if they beat the Islanders Thursday. That'd be a huge win if they do, but I'm not expecting it. They should certainly beat Buffalo. I certainly think they should be able to get a win against the Devils as well. I'd like to see 3 out of 4, but 2-2 would be okay. Maybe one of those losses in overtime, so you at least get a loser point out of it. But I mean, just with the playoff race as tight as it is, I really don't think they can afford to lose more than 2 of these games coming up. I mean, they got to pick up wins when they can get them. When you have Buffalo and New Jersey on your schedule, you've got to pick up wins there. And those are games that the Bruins should be winning on a regular basis, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I certainly hope that they win at least 3 of those games. Again, I think there's a decent chance that after the layoff, the way they've played this season, they might have a real rough first game and then have a second game to need to kind of right the ship and then
All right. Well, we'll see how they do. They've got the Islanders, Sabres, and Devils coming up this week. And it will be nice to see the Bruins back in action after not having any hockey for basically the past week. It'll be nice to see them actually on the ice and playing again. And breaks have not been good for the Bruins this season, but we'll see if they can come back a little bit stronger from this one. But big week of Bruins hockey coming up. That brings us now to our final segment before we end the show. It's Bruins Bet of the Week. Now, Ryan, I know not much of a gambler, so I'll just take this one. This is where we look at the Bruins' upcoming week of games, and I choose one bet that I think is a really solid pick. I won't call it a lock because there is no such thing as a lock in the NHL. It's literally impossible to correctly predict all the time. But I'm really liking the Bruins against the Devils under 5.5 total goals. That game's coming up on the 28th. That is Sunday's game. After that game's in the evening. It's not quite an afternoon game. It's a 5:30 start, so kind of a weird start time there. But those earlier start times generally are lower scoring to begin with. The Bruins have been playing the under all month long. I think only one game the Bruins have played in the month of March have had more than 5 goals in it. So they've been under all month long. Devils are generally an under team, especially when Mackenzie Blackwood's in goal. I mean, he's a great young goaltender with a lot of potential and a guy that does good keeping the puck out of the net. Bruins obviously do not give up a lot of goals. So I would expect that to be kind of a 2-1, 3-1 type game. And my bet of the week for this week, I'm taking the under at 5.5 on Sunday's game against the Devils. So that's my Bruins bet of the week, and that's going to do it for episode 13 here. So, Ryan, again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on and be on the show this week. I really appreciate it, and this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I would agree. This is a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on, John.
Yeah, of course. We'll definitely have to do it again at some point in the future, maybe later in the season. And want to thank everybody here watching, all of you guys. Obviously, audience is a big reason how we're able to do this. So thank you to everybody. And huge thank you to Mark Allred and everybody at the Black and Gold Productions team. What an amazing group of people to be a part of. And, Ryan's one of my teammates there with the Bruins Breakdown show. Whole podcast network of incredible podcasts. Great website, blackandgoldhockey.com. We have an amazing team of writers pumping out articles each and every day, all Bruins-related content. Absolutely incredible. So, you'll definitely want to check that out. Bruins Breakdown is a great show, one of the many great shows that are part of Black and Gold Productions here. Ryan and Leon do an incredible job with that. I was on that show earlier in the year. Both of them have now been on Black and Gold Weekly here. And it's great to talk hockey with them every chance that I get. And it's great to listen to as well. And just a great show for Bruins fans to really keep in touch with what's going on and with the team and all of that. So, finally, one last mention of the links down in the description. NHL gear, Boston Bruins gear, and NCAA gear. All 3 links are down in the description. Would really mean a lot if you check those out. And, they've got pretty much anything that you could possibly want with as far as products go with regards to those 3 different things. So that's going to finish up episode 13 here, guys. Thank you all so much. I'll be back next week with episode 14. Hopefully it will be another great one, and hopefully we'll have some Bruins wins to talk about. But until then, I am going to sign off. Have a great week, guys, and talk to you soon.